Welcome to Procurement Reimagined, a podcast by Gatekeeper. We believe traditional procurement has had its day, the world is changing, and our industry needs to change with it. On the podcast, we share the best practices to help you streamline your procurement processes, navigate vendor onboarding, and ultimately get the most value out of your vendor contracts. I'm your host, Daniel Barnes. In this episode, I'm joined by Hannah MacDonald, Supplier Operations Lead at Monzo Bank. In this episode, we discuss the role of automation in procurement management at a large scaling company. Enjoy. So today, we're going to be talking about reimagining automation in the procurement space, which I know people hear about automation, they instantly think about like artificial intelligence, robots, losing their jobs, a whole bunch of other factors that seem to kind of concern them. Firstly, I just wanted to kind of give you an open floor here just to kind of talk about that. And we'll go from there.
Yeah, I suppose where do we start? Because I think, as you've just alluded to, the art of the possible is massive. And I think for me, like having spent like the last few years doing this in different types of organization, like even traditional tooling like ERP solutions are just built for different types of organizations. They're very manufacturing led, or they talk about goods and stock inventories when what you're actually buying is like software from a provider or consultancy. And so I think like even if you take it back to the bare minimum basics around like ERP procurement, general ledger systems and so on, like the tools just don't seem to fit the modern world anymore, or certainly the world that we're going into. Things like the language doesn't mirror how people speak to each other day to day. And like instantly you see barriers come up around like people not wanting to use it because like they're talking, what's a stock inventory when you've got a consultant coming on site or something like that. So I think when you talk about automation and procurement space, I think you can go back to like absolute basic levels of like, what do we need to do? And even that goes to around like communicating with your stakeholders day to day. Like it can be as simple as like a Slack bot or an automated email to say, hey, I've got your request. We're working on it. This is what we're going to be doing. Or, things to manage like team workload or contract approval flows through something like DocuSign or EchoSign. And I think just like from my, I suppose, perspective, anything that you can do to get the best out of your team and maximize the benefit of like face-to-face or in-person time on the parts that really matter is automation where it's in its sweet spot. And that can be like, things like contract admin, everyone knows is not the most exciting part of the role.
Definitely not.
but you've got to find a way to do it right, because if you unlock that, it makes like things like, oh, hey, I got a reminder to say my renewals are due. We should start planning that. So I think, there's definitely some old-fashioned ways of working in bigger systems, but also there's some real basic level stuff that you can fix yourself. And like you alluded to, the future around artificial intelligence or machine learning algorithms doing sourcing or evaluation and selection or contracting, could you have a bot that's like willing to do some of the negotiation work? I think like if it's low risk and you set the right parameters to work within, then it's got potential. There's people using robotic processing to do invoice processing and matching and payrolls. But then like this week's been really telling. You only have to look at ChatGPT that's been launched.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, is it a complete game changer?
It's my best friend.
Like, it's insane, right? I had to mess around with it and I was like, okay. I mean, the issue for me is, does everything come out as a homogenized response? Like everyone starts sounding the same because they're using the same algorithm. But like, if you can start to use tooling like that to speed up work, and like I've looked at contract negotiation tools with like model clauses in there, but nothing has really like floated my boat that said, actually, I can really see this working in real life in a real practical situation. And I think if you work in a very standardized operation where you're churning out the same contracts all the time, and the only things that are changing is maybe, the standard fields of like who's the organization and stuff like that, you can definitely automate. But when you're working in a growth organization or something that's doing something a bit different, no contract is ever the same, right? You want to make sure you're mitigating as much risk as possible and you're managing the processes as, I suppose, you're standardizing them as much as possible to make it efficient. But actually the content of what's in there is very different depending on what scenario you're going into. So I'm yet to see one that's kind of like ticked all my boxes, but I definitely think there's potential as like this space matures.
I wanted to these questions may go nowhere. And that's fine because that's the power of editing. But I think it's relevant. So we're recording this during effectively the ChatGPT release. And I just wanted to share one thing. I was messing around with it And I asked it to write me a procurement policy, and I set out all the parameters for like spend volumes, categories and things like that. It wrote one in like 2 seconds for me, and it was absolutely incredible. It's like a 2-pager, which I thought was quite a sweet spot. I also asked it to make me a contract review process, and it wrote me a 8-step contract review process that pretty much mirrored everything I've ever created. I couldn't get it to do too much more, but maybe that's my limitations with it, and I think over time I'll be able to get a bit more out of it. So I'm excited. I thought that was a really cool one that you picked up on. With Slack, I know you mentioned Slack and giving notifications. Is that something you utilize at Monzo?
For everything.
Yeah.
It's a huge benefit for us, and I've said it before to like other people, which is, I think when you're looking to deploy tooling into an organization, you really have to think about adoption and like how easy is it going to be for somebody to use. How, I remember giving my mum an iPad and she was like, where's the instruction book? And I was like, it's intuitive. And she's like, what do you mean by that? And I was like, just play with it. And you could see her face dropped, and I was like, oh God, okay, right, I'll show you the basics. But for us at Monzo, like Slack is our native communication tool. And when I say people live in it, they absolutely live and breathe in it. We have so much built into that around incident management, around like contacting certain teams and contacting them in a structured way so that you put all the information into the person responding to it has got as much information as possible. So for me, like any tooling that we try and introduce, my default response is, okay, like, is there any way that we can do this with Slack or with an integration with Slack? Because the more I keep it looking natural and native to Monzo and our staff, the higher the adoption rate is going to be, the less I have to train somebody, and the less, I think you've got a fear factor, right? The moment you take them out into a new system, have I done something right? Have I done something wrong? Like, when do I get an update? And because of like everybody working in Slack all of the time, they know when it's been logged, and we're very transparent at Monzo, so most of our channels are open. The other thing that gives you is a complete history of what's been done from start to finish. So you have to have good practices around making sure that content communications are either held within one channel, or if you've gone to another channel because maybe there's a big project that's running that can't be kind of run in one thread, that you make sure you link out. So if anyone goes back to that at a later date, they can follow the trail of everything that's happened. It has saved my bacon on many times, and especially having done almost 5 years, I can still remember, like I can search people's names and I'll be like, I know who worked on that, and I will guess words to try and find stuff if I can't find it logged anywhere else. So yeah, I think for me that means our adoption rate should be much better than using a different product where you take people out of their comfort zone and make them feel like they're doing something different.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool point around like the risks around this space, right? Because if you have an amazing tool, like, and Slack is definitely one of those amazing tools, and everyone's using it, how can you suddenly, if you introduce change, do you just suddenly make a really inefficient way of working because you lose adoption? So adoption effectively is one of the key risks there. Are there any other risks you see to automation? Maybe I'll share like a silly one, because I've been talking about automation for a couple of years now. Whenever I write about it, people are like, oh no, it can't do stuff like that. Like it can't create records. It can't do this. You need someone to do that. And I just think these are sort of education barriers. Are there any other risks that you've kind of seen to being able to automate more in procurement arise?
Yeah, so I think definitely start small. So I think, again, everyone thinks of this, like, I suppose, North Star / panacea version of you need a fully end-to-end automated product which removes loads of human interaction, which is absolutely not where you want to go. You want to get rid of the mundane, repetitive stuff that really like needs data quality is like one of the key things. So I think starting small, like don't buy the whizzy tool at the start, build from the ground up, work out what's broken, work out what works well, and fix things before you kind of do it. And there's that old saying of like, don't outsource what's broken, it will cost you more to manage.
Yeah.
And I think the same rule applies in this scenario, which is really understand how you are operating as a team, then try and like systemize it, and then move it into tooling, which will then you can start to see, okay, we can make a shortcut here. I'm doing the exact project at the moment. I want, like, for every request that we get, so if it could be I want to work with a new supplier or extend something with an existing one, there are multiple tasks which hang off of that. Now, at the moment, we have to manually create all of those. So I've got someone in my team now working to say, okay, when we get a task, it will automatically create these activities. If we don't need it, fine, we'll shut it down. But if we do, then starts to push workload to other teams so that they can then track it. And also from a visibility point of view, if you're the person making the request and you can see that there's 6 activity streams underneath your single request, 5 are complete, you know, you've only got 1 left to do. So it's a much easier kind of narrative to kind of like explain to people this is where you are in the journey. So for me, like in this space, definitely start small. And I think the other thing is like find the skills in your team to do this. So when I first joined Monzo, like I was brought in as an ops kind of specialist. I'd done this stuff before, but I came into the legal team as a starting point. And actually lawyers are not set up to do work like this. There's a very, very different mindset. So I think one of the risks that you have is you try and get people that are maybe not suited to this type of activity, trying to drive it through. Actually having someone that geeks out a bit on, you know, writing a bit of code or wants to do workflow and optimization, and their brain naturally thinks that way, you will find your answers much, much quicker. So for me, being multi-skilled in procurement is like understanding operational processes, how to optimize them, and knowing what your end users need or your internal stakeholders, whatever you want to call them, but also what do you need from that system. So for me, the data is key. I want to be able to work out when we're seeing repeat tasks, which are low risk. Okay, we've had 10 of those. How can I push it to self-serve? You know, how can we reduce the friction for somebody doing it? And then I think the other thing for me, and like I have to, again, being in high growth companies, this is almost like my de facto mode, which is like you have to think and look ahead. Like you have to have a general idea of when something in your team is going to hit a crunch point and break. So like I remember writing in Slack months before it happened, like I called it, I was like, we're going to outgrow the system in the next 6 months. And following on from that, you should be planning to do something about it, because if you just keep going, the hole will get bigger. It's like, you know, the digging the hole and just you end up in the deeper hole and you can't get out of it. So for me, definitely be forward thinking around like what does your organization need at a particular point in time? And if you're in a high growth company, you should be ahead of the curve. You've got to be, because otherwise you can't scale and you will become like the worst word that you want to be, which is the blocker. And that's not the position that you want to be in.
And deservedly so, right? Like you would actually become a true blocker. It's really interesting. Like my last role, like one of the first things I looked at was like, oh, what does our tech stack look like in here? Because we were just building up processes as a greenfield team, probably very much like your role initially at Monzo. It was like, oh, this is kind of working now. We've got repetitive tasks here that we probably need to get rid of. And like, what's the direction we need to be in like 2-3 years time? Because every other part of the business is scaling and we need to at least keep up or get ahead so that we are all in sync. Otherwise, everything is just going to be on us. And as soon as that happens, you lose. We've already spoken about adoption of processes and policies and governance. And then no one wants to use you, right? Like they will just circumvent you at every opportunity. One thing you mentioned, and I thought it was kind of cool, was around coding there. And I just wanted to ask a question as to when you're hiring, are you looking for that skill set on someone's sort of CV? Like, oh, I'm savvy, I can code in various languages or whatever. And how are you addressing that?
Is the answer. So our team is made up of risk management people, procurement, contracts. And then last year we made a decision that we really needed, like I suppose what Monzo calls like an analyst role. So somebody to come in and support the team doing other tasks. But for us, they had to be data savvy. We needed to work out how to build some dashboards. And like, I could probably do it. Is it the best use of my time? No. So yeah, absolutely. We brought in, I refused to hire externally and said I only wanted to develop someone from in-house. So we took someone from our customer operations team and we hired only within that, well, basically advertised only within that space in the business and said, we want somebody to grow with us. And this is an amazing opportunity if you've got any interest in these types of areas. And so, yeah, absolutely. Data, I think low-level SQL skills were required. And it's such a payoff for us. It's accelerating things that we just haven't had time to do. So yeah, when you talk about like, how do you make up your team and what are the risks, not having those type of people, they become like real enablers for getting stuff done. And also if they're not involved in some of the other day-to-day stuff, they can really focus on this. And therefore you get results much quicker.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Actually, Oh, I can remember a couple of years ago speaking to people, and they were saying effectively like the procurement team in the future is not going to be made up of like category managers, which I know yours it certainly isn't. It's more ops based, and then you'll have people who are effectively data scientists, analysts who are crunching numbers, building out data sets, and kind of trying to figure out where's the direction of travel based on all of that incredible data that you're building up. And it already sounds like you have created that as a foundation within the team, which is awesome.
Yeah. I think we've got aspirations of what we'd love to do. It's just the reality of getting some of it done.
It takes time, right? As well. This isn't easy to do.
It's not. And also for us, that everything's a moving target. I think if you're in an organization that's got fairly static growth levels, it's very easy to predict some of the things that are going to happen. But when you talk about having like data and helping that to drive decisions, we partner with like the financial planning team, we partner with the finance team, we partner with security, privacy. You've all got data coming in from different things. So with the financial planning team, it's like, how many customers are we going to have? Because some of our contracts are driven by volume, and we need to understand, what's the average cost per customer. Other things are driven by headcount. How many people are we going to have? And so if you don't have those data points to hand when you're doing negotiations or trying to pull together what's the best deal for Monzo at that particular time, it's made up of, you're crunching numbers. So the commercial side of it, you're using data to make good risk decisions based on either mitigating risk or accepting it, and be that across privacy, security, financial crime. So if you're not using data that you have, and believe me, we are not perfect in any way, but our aspirations are we should be making data-driven decisions, and we should be feeding that up to the people that are ultimately accountable for saying, yes, we're going to go ahead with this because they feel they've got all of the information to make a good decision on behalf of Monzo.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. And I'm going to slightly change direction now because we spoke just before we hit record about ESG, and it's something that's been on my mind. I've been thinking about it over the last year, and I want to kind of gauge your view on what role procurement has to play. And we'll use the word procurement broadly here, especially given the makeup of the team that you've just said, which is a very non-traditional procurement team, and maybe a procurement team of the future.
Yeah. Oh, this is an interesting one. So I think, so I got given this project when I got back from my sabbatical, and they were like, hey, ESG sits in your area now for Han. We've got to work all this out. And I was like, okay, no worries. So yeah, I've been literally swallowing the book on ESG recently. And I think my take on it is we've got a very, very unique opportunity to influence sustainability in our organizations and through supply chains. My take on this is also, I think we're in the midst of a generational change, and people are making very, very clear and like informed decisions around the impact they want to have on the planet. And my take on this is our next procurement leaders will have even more data at their fingertips than we do now. I still feel like we're kind of like guessing a bit I think if you work in a manufacturing or production environment, I think it's a bit different. But certainly if you work in tech, like scope 3 is a minefield. Like I cannot find any solid ground to stand on that gives me like accurate data. So yeah, so I think we are in a very, very unique position. And I think if you want to be a procurement professional in the future, if you're not an advocate for ESG, you're probably in the wrong role. I think this is going to become like a fundamental pillar of everybody's job within this area. So I think like there's that around like your own personal development and what kind of person you want to be when you're playing your procurement role or wearing that hat. But then also like organizations that truly want to partner with you and that you want to work with really need to be aligned to your values, because as an organization, there's no point being the best vendor in the market if your ESG strategy is at complete odds with your customers. It's going to cause a lot of friction, and ultimately it's probably going to be a decision which means that somebody decides not to work with you. So and I think you can look at B Corp companies or someone like Tridos Bank that's very green. Like they're only going to work with organizations that align with that market that they're going for and their like underlying beliefs as an organization. So I think like for me, huge opportunity here to really drive like what the future is around like emissions, making sure that you're net zero by certain dates. How you maintain that is again another bit of a minefield. Like I can't find a single framework for measuring this.
There isn't, I don't think. I was doing some research earlier this year, and the only frameworks I could find were around investments opportunities, and I read through so many of those, and they still told me nothing. Really. It's impossible at the moment.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit challenging, I'll be honest. But I think from my point of view, I think the best thing that we can ask of our suppliers, third parties, vendors, whatever you want to call them, is they need to be transparent and share their plans. And if we can get that as a starter for 10, then I think the discussions we have around how you reduce that, or how you offset that through carbon credits, or however you want to kind of architect that relationship you have with them, there needs to be transparency on both sides. Like, what is your plan? Like, what's Monzo's, like, or my plan or my target and ambition date for net zero? What's yours? And let's try and work out the delta in between and make sure that we can both work together to achieve that. But then also, like, you've got nuances around within, like, Google, you can opt to choose which region you host your data in and which where you're processing. Now, they have some regions which are more green than others. So you can electively start to choose. If I host out of Norway, it's going to be better than a host out of, another country. And you can reduce your emissions by just being very careful about making some choices. So I'd love to remove some of the guesswork because I think if you really want to make this part of, like, your underlying decision-making process when selecting a third party, you need to have some consistency in how you're measuring your current outputs, how you assess what your new vendor may introduce into your carbon emissions, and then make a decision based on that. And then you can bring in, contractual clauses around, like, how do you want to work together? Do you put penalties in? Do you give incentives for being green? I think there's different ways that you can do it. But I think for me, work together collaboratively on this and somehow try and come up with a framework which is consistent across, like, all of it. It would be lovely to not have quite as much guesswork in this space.
Yeah, completely agree with you there. It's I think it's a really cool challenge though to have. I think you're probably equally excited and daunted by
yes, that's exactly
the
how
task
I feel.
at the same time, right? But I the way I see it is that, we'll probably have C-suite roles that are chief sustainability officers at almost every company in the future. They'll probably come from a sort of futuristic procurement team, probably one that kind of resembles what you've started to put together at Monzo. So I think, I think your advice there is pretty cool. And we've kind of covered this next question. So the question I was going to ask was, based on your experiences, what best practices would you recommend to other procurement professionals? And, like, I think you just gave one really sound bit of advice, which is get hot on ESG sustainability and really prioritize that. Is that kind of where you kind of, would that be the one area you would say to focus on, or is there anything else you can think of that maybe, is it focus on ops? Is it get smart with the way in which you can digitalize aspects? I'll kind of hand that over to you.
God, yeah. Again, another question that's really broad.
It's hard, right?
I think, like, if I was coming into procurement now and, like, knowing what I've learned over the last however many years, like, be a really well-rounded procurement professional and have the skills, or be willing to learn them, that are going to meet the aspiration of the organization that you want to be in. So, like, my background is tech. I worked out, like, I geek out on stuff. Okay, that's a good sweet spot for me to be in. But things like, I can understand, like, how databases work. I've got a good understanding of, like, cloud architecture. I've managed suppliers. I've been an internal account manager, and then getting into banking, I've had to, like, upskill in a different way. So I think, like, understand, like, what do you need to do to be successful in the type of organization that you want to work in. I think for me, like, work in a place that you truly love and believe in the mission and that embodies, like, your own personal values. I think working in that type of environment will really enrich, like, any personal career in a lot of different ways. So I think, like, be a multi-skilled person. I think you are much more valuable. And yeah, like, I get category management. I think for certain particular things, it's absolutely the right thing to do in particular areas. But I think if you want to work in a tech company or a growth company, like, you need to be willing to wear many hats, especially if you join when they're small. The
category management approach is really interesting, because I kind of feel like we're going to see it die out. That's just my personal view with, like, the tech that's out there that effectively does all the market intelligence for you. And, like, in this tech space, having a category management approach, to me, is the complete wrong approach. The approach that's right is what you've just said, which is have really well-rounded people who understand software, who understand maybe, like, usage and how that interacts, much to your point earlier, in terms of having good data. Do they understand processes? Can they talk to people? Which sounds like a really silly one, but when you really need to be able to talk internally and externally to get all of this. Yeah, so I think being well-rounded is the best advice anyone can have right now.
I think it's invaluable. Like, we do partner particular people with certain teams because they've got experience. So one of my team does a lot of work with marketing. It also gives them a person that they can trust, they go to on a regular basis. But if that person's off, it doesn't mean that the world stops. So somebody can still pick it up. And I think, again, small lean teams, and like, let's be realistic, right? We are in an economic downturn. Lots of people are being laid off. You need to be really careful about, like, how do you set your team up to succeed in like an environment where it's going to be probably quite challenging to get new headcount. Like, that's the reality.
Yeah, definitely.
Suppliers are going to put their prices up. So, finding the optimum way for your team to run in that particular environment, I think is key. I think the other thing for me is like networking, like post-COVID. I've been to 2 events in the last like 2 weeks, one in person, one on a big like webcast thing. And those 2 events have given me new contacts, new material, and have pushed forward my thinking on like understanding of topics, like in the space of a couple of days. And I like, again, there's so much going on in this space. It's such an interesting spot to be in. So many different topics: risk management, ESG, whatever you want to call it, automation of contracting. Like, if you don't have those networks and you're not tapped into kind of like what's going on, you will be left for dust. Like, you will struggle to kind of like find your way forward. So for me, like, especially post-COVID, like, develop your peer networks, find safe spaces to talk to people under Chatham House rules if you want, where you can just be like, look, I'm really struggling with this, how have you got on? And like, yeah, like I said, those couple of events have really made a difference for me in terms of thinking, and also just opened up doors for like, I can go talk to that person now. Hey, I saw you were on the call the other day. It was really nice. I love the question that you asked. I'd love to talk to you more about it.
We did that, right? Like earlier this year. Yeah, it's just this is literally how we maybe were talking on LinkedIn and we started chatting and shared some insights into, well, we had very similar roles before I moved on, right? So it was, I'm with you. I think I've kind of prioritized the last 2 years of building a network, and I almost feel like, if anything comes up in any topic in procurement or legal ops, I've probably got 5-10 people on each one that I can just message, and they'll probably message back very quickly and give me some insights or suggest someone that I can go to. And that's been way more powerful than anything else I've done so far.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, like, again, like, you think about career progression, where you want to end up. Having those networks opens up a million doors. Like, you may get tapped up by the company, or you start, liaising with a person that's at the dream company that you've always wanted to work at. And just by building those networks, you create opportunities that wouldn't have existed before. So I think for me, like, it's such a biggie. And like, go work in a place that you truly love. Like, I picked Monzo as my target, like, next organization, and it has paid dividends, like, beyond anything that I ever expected.
Were you a customer before you joined?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't want awkward question if you weren't.
No. Very funny story. So I found Monzo by accident because I was going to Ibiza on holiday, and I had this premonition I was going to lose my card. Anyway, my card did get nicked in a club, and then someone tried to take out like 2,000 euros off of it, which failed miserably. But my phone was like popping with all these alerts of them trying to use cash points, and I was like, this company is epic. And I was like, I said to my friend, I was like, I'm going to work there. So, and for me, Monzo is doing good for society, and I love the mission behind what we're trying to do, which is like, make people more financially aware, make them, or help them make good decisions. And there's something like truly wonderful about feeling like what the work that you're doing is having a lasting impression on someone's life. So I picked up Monzo a very, very long time. It was like, I think 2016. And 2018 I turned up.
That's incredible. So I'm a Monzo customer and absolutely love it. I have the nice metal card now, which I just got a few months ago.
Good.
Oh man, just love everything about it so far. Incredible advice. And maybe we'll go on to like a quick fire round. And the first question I'm going to ask you, I think I know the answer to, which is, what's one piece of tech you can't live without? But I'll just pass that over to you.
Can I pick 2?
Yeah, of course. Pick us.
Okay. So I think for me, Google Docs and Slack. I'm willing to say, if you're working on OneDrive or something like that. But for me, 2 tools that you can collaborate. God, I can't say it now. Collaborate with everyone in real time and you have complete transparency around what's going on is such an enabler, and it makes my job and like my team's job and everybody else that's involved so much easier, especially if you work in an organization which is super transparent anyway. So yeah, like I can't imagine going back to the days of like marking up a contract, emailing it to someone, then they send it back. Like for us, just working in real time is it just means we can get everything done so much faster.
Yeah, I'm with you. I Slack is, I know there can be a lot of negatives with it.
There is.
they're always on, like the notifications, but you can just dial them down to like, so you just change your work hours in it, change notification times, block people from reaching out. Oh, I just love it. And Google Docs and that whole suite. Yeah, incredible. You can give me a range for the next questions, because I appreciate you may not want to share exact numbers or anything, but like how many vendors do you currently manage in total?
So we've got about between 500 and 600 suppliers.
And how many of you are in the team?
There are 5.
Yeah, that's like, even if you assigned like one person to like a block, it's like 100, 150, right? Probably.
Yeah. So I think like we don't divvy up work in that way as such. We take a really proportionate approach to managing our third parties. So all of our suppliers are tiered. We've got a tiering of like 1 to 4. Those that are in the top bucket are very small. I think we've got 6 or 7 of them in tier 1. Those are like bank breaking. So if they fail, like everything at Monzo like grinds to a halt.
The regulator will have you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so so those get the most attention out of all of them. They get the most oversight from us. They've got dedicated people in the business that are managing either work streams within them, or they've got accountable execs, are very aware of what's going on in that space. So yeah, those get the most. And then basically we just scale down. So the oversight level for the next tier down is that we don't monitor them quite as often. They still go through all the same due diligence process, by the way. So we do like an inherent risk assessment when we're onboarding, based on like, are you sharing data? Is it critical? Is it part of the app? So all of those questions get asked. What comes out of that then is a proportionate level of due diligence based on how we're going to use that third party. So yeah, we've taken the approach that like, let's manage this from a risk point of view rather than a like number or volume. Like there's no way we could get through it all. And at the bottom, we've got what we call tactical, which is tier 4. So it could be like, want to post a job advert on an online website, or, you know, memberships for like, you know, like industry bodies or things like that. We can't manage them. They're just suppliers that we need.
There's no need to, is there? There's like the inherent risk there of anything coming back on you is virtually zilch, right? Like
we probably spend most of our time probably working on a range of like anywhere between like 25 to 40 suppliers that get the most of our attention. So yeah, it works for us. And I think we, you know, the regulator talks a lot about being proportionate. And I think what we've set up is something that really focuses our attention on the things that matters, and still giving good oversight and having good governance around all of the rest. Just we don't give them as much TLC as some of the other ones.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's the exact model that I used as well previously, the risk segmentation. I'm super conscious of time. I just wanted to ask you the next 2 super quickly. Do you know how many contracts you kind of sit under there? Is it like around the same sort of number or slightly more?
Yeah,
like it kind
similar.
of normally aligns.
Yeah, most of our suppliers have got like
a main agreement, like a DPA, maybe like NDAs.
Like everyone's got an NDA. Underneath that, there's normally a master services agreement. I'd say some suppliers have got like multiple schedules of work, or we use them for multiple services. So someone like Google, we use for BigQuery, like GCP stuff. We've also got Workspace, we've got marketing, we've got maps, we've got ads. So that's got a bunch of different, but they're quite few and far between. Most suppliers either supply 1 or 2 services to us, and they're normally covered under one contract. So we try to optimize towards having things rolled up so that we only have to go through like one renewal cycle, and it means that once the due diligence covers it, otherwise you're like chasing your tail all the time on contract renewals. So it's just quite an inefficient way to operate.
I really like that approach. And the weirdest question I'm going to ask you is, I'm a procurement genie, what's your wish?
I think I'd love a system where we can exchange contracts with third parties. That doesn't mean you have to download something out of Google Docs, send it, email it. And I know so many people have tried to do this with like online collaboration tools, but every party involved wants to use their own system. And so you end up with this, well, no, we can't use yours, or no, we can't use mine. I'm like, oh, so just some sort of tool that would just make negotiating on a contract. I'd actually love to get to a point where people were quite willing to mark up the same document together, even if you need to have conversations outside of that document on the side to kind of agree a position. But yeah, one like document to rule the world would be amazing. But like everyone's so worried about protecting their like own interests and worry. But I see a lot of posts around, even lawyers saying, wouldn't it be great if we could just like let it go and just agree that everyone's trying to get to the similar position in a contract, and the majority of clauses probably only need a bit of tweaking.
Yeah, it's true. But still there's so much barrier to actually having that, right? Like every conversation I was having in the last 2 years, it was just like, we're trying to do the same thing here. Let's just, that word there can probably just go, and then we've done it. And those decisions can sometimes take days just to come to. It's a really cool point. Hannah, it's been so much fun having you on here, so much insights. But thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. No, it was such an interesting topic. I like geeking out on it, as you can tell.
Procurement Reimagined is brought to you by Gatekeeper. To find out more about Gatekeeper and how our vendor and contract lifecycle management solution is delivering visibility, control, and compliance to our customers, visit www.gatekeeperhq.com. And then make sure to search for Procurement Reimagined in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Gatekeeper, thanks for listening.